Well, I certainly appreciate the introduction. I feel like I've been introduced personally by Rupert Murdoch, and I certainly thank you very much for that. Now, this is an interesting experience for me because when I talk in front of Canadian audiences, usually in the East, where everybody is relatively a Bolshevik to every person who appears as a Democrat here. Here I finally have an audience that calls themselves conservative, which means they're moderate Democrats back home. But I want to be serious for a minute and tell you what I think is going on. And this is a bit more, I hope, a little bit deeper than what you're going to see on the cable shout shows. First of all, in order to put last night in context, you have to put the election of Barack Obama in context in the United States. Barack Obama represents a new generation of Americans and a new generation of politicians. He's 47. The generation that elected him is under 35. More people under 35 years old in the last election in 2008 voted than people who were over 65. That has never happened in my lifetime in politics. So this is the younger generation who elected Barack Obama. And they did it because Barack Obama is one of them, even though there's an age discrepancy. And what I mean is this. In the younger, under 35 generation, and this may be true here as well, I don't know, but in the under 35 generation, they're the children of people who went through the Civil Rights Revolution in the United States. Now, when I was certainly a strong advocate of civil rights when I was at university and so forth, but I didn't grow up with people that were different than I am. We grew up in silos. We believed in the principle of it, but we didn't actually live it. Young people in the United States and around the world have friends of every color, every ethnicity, every religion, every sexual orientation, and they all date each other. Now, what does this mean? Young people are not tolerant. They are inclusive. And why did I start off with this? Because I want you to understand the phenomenon of yesterday, not just in terms of the economy, which is the number one issue. The right-wing spinners last night were trying to pretend this was all about health care. According to the Wall Street Journal NBC poll, 68% of the voters were majorly concerned about the economy. 13% went to vote on the basis of the health care bill. It seems to me it's pretty obvious that the economy is a driving factor. But there's another factor, the Tea Party. Now, I don't condemn the Tea Party. I don't agree with much they say politically, but as a grassroots politician, I love what they're doing. I think you have to like people who actually get up off their duff and try to do something politically about something they don't agree with and use the constitutional means available to them to do it. And that's what they did. And they organized well. I actually saw Matt Kibbe last night, who I can't wait till my end of the spectrum sees this, told me that they studied our campaign really carefully as they were putting together the Tea Party, which made me very nervous. Lest that get out in Daily Kos, I'll be unmasked as a secret right-wing sympathizer. But the truth is, it's a good thing for people to get involved. I don't agree with a lot they do, but one of the things that's fascinating that's about this election that nobody ever talks about, and the Republicans get very nervous when I talk about it, is that demographics are driving what you just saw. And rather than the Tea Party being the first beginning of a new movement, I think it's the last gasp of an old generation. And I truly believe in this. I'm not trying to be snotty. And I think they're going to do some good things, these Tea Party people in Congress, because I think spending is out of control, and I think the deficits are the biggest problem the United States has. But these are almost all over 55. They're almost all white. And they are looking at a demographic of a new generation and now a new president that signals a change that's irreversible that's happening in our country. In California, for the last 15 or 20 years, there's been no majority. There's been Asian Americans, Anglos, African Americans, Hispanics, American Indians, etc. But there's none of them that are in the majority. That's what the United States is going to look like in another 20 or 30 years. And all of a sudden, people have seen this coming for a long time, but all of a sudden, Barack Obama, the first multicultural president elected by a multicultural generation, is president of the United States, and it makes people uncomfortable. Is there a racist fringe in the Tea Party? Yes. I don't think, but of course the news media always focuses on that because that's more exciting for them. But I don't think the average person in the Tea Party is a racist. I really don't. But change is concerning. Everybody in America says, we want change. Yeah, they always want change until they get into the ballot box, and then they don't want quite as much as they actually said they did. And so now we really have change in America. So that's the first thing. There's a whole substrate to this. Now, if the economy were a lot better, this wouldn't be a big issue. But the economy isn't good. And when the economy isn't good, people are looking at other folks to blame. We've seen this. Father Coughlin in the Depression was a typical extraordinary example of this sort of thing. The last two things I want to say about last night are much more immediate. The truth is that the White House, first of all, the senior staff were people who'd been in Washington for years and years and years. And I think the president did that by design because he saw the administrations of Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, who didn't have very many people who were insiders, and they had trouble in the first 2 years managing, because running the federal government is a whole lot different than running a campaign or running a state government. So he picked really experienced people. The problem is they're all inside the Beltway people. And I think there was a misunderstanding about what kind of change people wanted, because there were two pools of people. There were people like me, progressives, who wanted health insurance reform and financial reform and all those things. I never used the word health care and reform in the same sentence discussing the bill, because all we did was expand our system. The interesting thing about the health care bill, there's only been one other person who ever signed a bill like that in the United States. His name is Mitt Romney. We copied the Massachusetts system. It's simply expansion of what we have to cover everybody else. So from the progressive side, we didn't see all the change we wanted. But that paled in comparison to what happened to all the independents and Republicans that voted for Barack Obama and gave him his enormous margin. They were not wanting the kind of policy change that progressive Democrats were. They wanted a fundamental change in the way business was done in Washington. I ran into two guys in Indiana who were home builders at a housing conference I was at. Indiana is a very Republican state. Both of them were, one called himself a Goldwater Republican, the other called himself a Reagan Republican. They both said they'd voted for Obama and they weren't going to do it again. They wanted fundamental change, not so much in the policy, healthcare policy. They wanted fundamental change. They didn't want the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the special interests and hospitals to have their say and make deals and $1 billion here and $155 billion there. They didn't want big corporations to be funding all the things that were going on in the Congress and influencing it. They wanted real change because they felt that they had been left behind. They felt that all the people in Congress were responsive to the people who had tons and tons of money, and they weren't helping the small business people at all. So in that sense, it was very much like what happened in Alberta years ago when the Reform Party started. It was a populist prairie rebellion. And I think that was missed entirely by the inside the Beltway, the people that the president hired to run the country. They understood how to run Washington. What they didn't understand is what happened in the rest of the country, which has 99.7% of the population of the country. And so I think you saw a very interesting mix of things that happened last night. I don't think it's all bad. I'm deeply saddened because some very, very good friends of mine lost their seats, and they were really good, hardworking, conscientious legislators. But there's going to be a new day in Washington. Hopefully it will focus on spending. Hopefully it won't be so ideological that nobody can get anything done. But it's also temporary. I think that the legions of young people that came out in 2008 will be back in 2012. That doesn't mean everybody who just won last night is going to lose their seat, but it means that there is very much of a balance. And most of all, the new generation has something that's very special and I think very much in common with the new generation in Canada. Young people are tired of the wars that my generation have. Their principal question to us is, when are you going to stop fighting about these things that you've been fighting about for 30 years and get something done about the things you can agree on? The young generation focuses on what they have in common. Our generation focuses on what they have that's different. Obama, I think, really does represent the young generation. Maybe he got in office a little ahead of his time because of the huge surge of votes. But in general, the United States, like most of the world, is moving towards a time where we're going to focus on what we have in common and get something done about it instead of fight about the things that keep us apart. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I should add, by the way, that last night Governor Dean's Vermont was about the best news for the Democratic Party. I should say, by the way, though, that we don't want to do any stereotyping here. Governor Dean comes from a state with a hugely high gun ownership, and he has a much better record on gun rights, for example, than some of the metrosexual moderate Republicans in Massachusetts and New York State, and never mind California. So we should be careful not to stereotype.